بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وقل جاء الحق وزهق الباطل إن الباطل كان زهوقا.
الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So inshallah we'll continue from where we left off from on Wednesday, and now we're on wisdom number 19, titled Ignorant Sufis and Their Erroneous Notions and Practices. So one important point right off the bat, right? The author of the book, not the author, but rather the person being quoted throughout most of the book, the Hakim al-Ummah Thanwi rahimahullah ta'ala, he himself was known as a great Sufi and a great Sufi reformer for that matter. And we talked about this earlier, that this is a person, in a nutshell, who's treading the path of Allah along the path of Sunnah, a person who's treading the path of Allah, trying to get closer to Him, the one who's treading this path of Allah, seeking to remove from himself all diseases of the heart and acquire all good positive qualities, all for the sake of ultimately gaining this proximity and closeness to Allah. This is who a Sufi is. Now, understanding this first and foremost, that in every single thing, right, in every single matter, you have what's called ifrat and tafrit. You have excess and inadequacies. Right? You have extremism in just about every single field, in every single matter. There's always people that are extreme, and in their extremes, they go overboard. Now, many things that people become extreme in, there's actually basis for them, right? Many things that people become extreme in, there's actually some moderation, some level of balance that exists between what is appropriate and what is inappropriate, right? This occurs in all things. So the reality is the middle path is the balanced path. But there are those people who disregard tasawwuf wholesale. Tasawwuf, meaning Sufism in English. Tasawwuf is one of the essential matters of deen, right? And this is the branch of deen. Just like, for example, there's branches of deen that discuss tafsir. There's branches of deen that discuss hadith. There's branches of deen that discuss fiqh. There's these different elements of the deen that are discussed in different branches, right? These are just subcategories of Islamic knowledge, right? We call that which is elaboration on the Quran, we call that tafsir. That which we call the implementation of the external rulings of Islam, we call fiqh, right? The laws governing the external rulings of Islam, we call fiqh, right? The matters concerning the life and biography, the details of the biography of the Prophet ﷺ, we call it sirah, right? We have these different terms to describe these different funun, these different branches of Islamic learning and knowledge. One of the branches is known as tasawwuf. Some people call it tasawwuf, some people call it tazkiyah, some people call it tarbiyah. These are all different terms that are used. It doesn't matter what term you use. The concept is what is the key. And this is the branch that deals with the rulings pertaining to the inner self. The rulings pertaining to the purification of the heart. So all those rulings in deen that pertain to inner matters. To give an example, when we talk about salat, right? There's an element of salat, there's an element of prayer that pertains to external matters. The fiqh of salat, right? That you have to have wudu, you need to face the qibla, you start with Allahu Akbar, you recite Al-Fatiha, you etc., 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 until the end of salat. These all have to do with the external elements of salat. But just like there are these external elements of salat regarding how a person needs to stand, how a person needs to prostrate, what a person needs to wear, the state a person needs to be in, there's also an internal element of salat, right? Very simple, concentration. That a person should have khushu', a person should have khudu', a person should have this awe of Allah, this humility of Allah, this fear of Allah while standing in prayer. That a person should be mindful in his prayer, a person should be conscientious in his prayer. These we don't refer to as matters of fiqh. These refer to the inner elements of salat. This is what would usually be discussed within the domains of suluk and tasawwuf. That the mashayikh of these fields would discuss these inner practices. So the field of tasawwuf is the field that focuses in on the inner practices of Islam. To disregard the inner practices of Islam is to disregard an enormous part of the deen itself, because a great deal of the deen, it focuses in on these inner practices. And so many of these points that are mentioned pertaining to the inner matters, matters of the heart, matters of the soul, they're such critical matters that the Prophet ﷺ gave warnings, severe warnings for those that allow these things to remain corrupted, right? For example, لا يدخل من كان في قلبه or لن يدخل من كان في قلبه مثقال ذرة من الكبر. That a person shall never enter paradise for as long as there remains within his heart an atom's weight, right? A mustard seed's amount of arrogance. So now we understand arrogance. There's not really a book of arrogance that's discussed in the books of fiqh. But we see that the Prophet has given a stern warning. Rather, he's given a very scary warning that a person who has this quality within him will be deprived of paradise. So clearly, arrogance and dealing with arrogance and purifying oneself of arrogance is of the utmost importance. Right? إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ كُلُّ مُخْتَالٍ فَخُورٍ. Indeed, Allah does not love every single boastful, flamboyant, arrogant person, right? Clearly, that means these qualities of boastfulness, these qualities of flamboyance and arrogance, these are things that a person should not have within them. But these are not discussed in the books of fiqh. Where are they discussed? They're books discussed in the books of tasawwuf, right? Some people don't like the term tasawwuf. That's fine. You don't need to like the term tasawwuf. You can leave the term tasawwuf. You can call it tazkiyah. You can call it suluk. You can call it tarbiyah. All these things are just synonymous terms that are used to describe the same thing, dealing with the heart and rectifying the heart, right? Removing all the negative qualities within a person and adorning the heart with all good qualities. Terms are not the focal point, right? Rather, many terms that we use nowadays, they weren't even used by the Prophet ﷺ, they weren't even used by the Sahaba, they aren't found in the Quran. Or the terms are there, but they were used in a different light. For example, the word sadaqah. Sadaqah in the Quran often means zakat. Right? We use zakat to mean something specific in nowadays, and we use sadaqah to refer to something specific. Right? Zakat we refer to the obligation of giving to the poor, whereas sadaqah we refer to as the optional, the optional giving of charity to the poor. Whereas in the Quran, sadaqah is often used to refer to zakat. In the hadith, sometimes sadaqah is used to refer to zakat. Similarly, there's many terms like this where the terms may indicate towards different things, or terms that were developed in the latter days of Islam. There's no harm in this. There's no problem in this. Why? It's because the reality is the essence. Right? Another example is sometimes in English we'll use the term God to refer to Allah. Is it permissible to refer to Allah as God? Of course. We won't say God is the name of Allah, but we understand that God is a word in the English language that refers to the Almighty Creator, that refers to the one that is almighty, all-powerful, completely in charge of all things. So to say Allah is the God, right? If you're trying to explain the concept that Allah is our creator, Allah is our sustainer, these are all English terms. If you go to a person who asks you, who is this Allah I always hear about? For example, one time a person came to me and showed me a book, right? It was a textbook. It was unfortunately a textbook that was being shared by people that had animosity towards Islam and all other religions other than their own. And it was polluted with all sorts of incorrect concepts of Islam. So he showed it to me and he's like, someone shared this with me and I wanted to ask you about it. So I opened it up and I looked at the section on Islam and it said that Muslims worship the moon god Allah. Now, any Muslim can obviously tell you that we don't worship the moon god. We worship the almighty creator of all existence, the creator of the moon, right? Now, if you're trying to explain to this person who we worship and you tell him, we worship Allah, He is our ilah, He is our khaliq, He is our raziq, He is He is ala kulli shayin qadir. That person is going to be all the more confused. Why? Because you're trying to explain to him in a language he doesn't understand. So we use terminology that the person is able to grasp. We use terminology the person is able to understand to give him da'wah. We say Allah is our creator. Allah is our God. Allah is our sustainer. Allah has no pair. There's no example like him. Now we're using these terms that are not terms that the Prophet himself used. They're terms in English and the Prophet would not speak English. Is there any harm in this? Clearly, there's no harm in this. Clearly, there's no issue with this, right? So just like this, terminology can be changed from one place to another. Another example is in many places, the term namaz is used for salat. The Prophet never used the term namaz. The Prophet called it salah. Or sometimes we'll say prayer. You don't go to your boss and say, I need to have time off for Jumu'ah salat. No, you'll tell him, I need time off for my Friday prayer. Brothers and sisters, understanding this point, it actually removes a lot of confusion that people have regarding many things. So yes, the Prophet might have never used the term tasawwuf to refer to the matters of purifying the heart. However, if people later on use this term to refer to that field, there's no harm in it. The key thing is understanding what is the essence of that field. If people have the correct understanding of the essence of the field, and that essence has a basis of this in the deen and in the sharia, then by all means we accept it wholeheartedly. So the Sufis were those people that focused on matters of the heart, right? So this is on one side. For those that have a problem with the term tasawwuf or Sufi, you can use whatever other term you want. You can use the term zahid, and you can use the term zuhud. You can use the term tazkiyah. You can use the term suluk. You can use the term tarbiyah, right? You can use any term that you like, that you're more comfortable with, but understand there is a matter of our sharia that focuses in on the internal aspects. And there were always people throughout Islamic history who were the people that preserved this legacy. Just like you had specialists in fiqh, you had specialists in hadith, you had specialists in tafsir, you also had specialists in the matters of the heart. And generally speaking, throughout the history of Islam, they were usually called the Sufis. Now, this is on one end. This is now understanding what this term means and how it applies. And brothers and sisters, you can apply this concept to many fields in Islam where there's a lot of controversy surrounding it. There's actually no controversy. There's no controversy in reality. It's just a mix-up. It's semantics, right? People have defined things differently. And there's people to be blamed for this as well, right? Just like that, when it comes to Sufis, many people that have an averse or an adverse reaction to the term Sufi is because there's some people that have hijacked the term in an inappropriate manner. They've turned tasawwuf into something that it in actuality is not, right? And they've introduced concept of the tasawwuf that has no basis. Now there's a tadrij, there's an evolution by which this took place. There's a step-by-step process by which this took place. And we came to this situation that we're in now. And this is now where Hakim al-Thanwi is now going to discuss. That there are certain people who call themselves Sufis, but they've come to an incorrect understanding of what is in reality tasawwuf. Just like, for example, we've seen this in our day and age. There are those people that have hijacked the term jihad and turned it into something that it's not. There are those people that hijack the term Islam and turn it into something that it's not. There's these groups that are out of control that wreak havoc and cause corruption in the earth in the banner of Islam, calling themselves by different slogans, calling themselves, the khilafat, calling themselves an Islamic government, calling themselves an Islamic state, doing things, claiming that they're doing jihad, doing things, claiming they're doing things fi sabilillah, when in reality they have no realization or reality of these terms whatsoever. And most Muslims understand and recognize the corruption that they're doing in the name of these things. We won't say that these terms are incorrect. We'll say what they're doing is incorrect. Just like that, there were people who called themselves Sufis, who thought they were practicing tasawwuf, but in reality, they introduced concept that had no basis in the deen, had no basis in the sharia, had no basis in what the Prophet ﷺ came with. Now, there might have been a step-by-step process that they came to that conclusion. We won't necessarily call them ill-intended. Many of them have good intentions, but they have incorrect methods. Many of them, in their good intentions, maybe read something in a book, maybe heard something in a lecture, maybe came to an incorrect assumption from their own notions, and as a result are doing things incorrectly. This is due to the ignorance that they hold regarding the field. It's not a problem or an issue in the field itself. I know this was a long introduction to this topic, brothers and sisters, but this will help us now understand this concept. When Hakim al-Ummah is referring to now, and what the compiler Sheikh Tamim is calling the ignorant Sufis, he's not referring wholesale to all those people that are practitioners of tasawwuf. No, rather, an element of tasawwuf is wajib. It is incumbent upon all Muslims. Where's my proof for that? is how we've explained. When you've defined tasawwuf to be purification of the heart, Allah says, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. That successful is the one who has purified the nafs, and doomed and failed is the one that has allowed it to be covered up in its flaws and faults. So when we understand the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself in the Quran is saying that those people that purify this nafs, they're successful. He's made purification of the soul a criteria of success. Then we understand this is something that is necessary to do. Not to mention all the ahadith, all the ayat of the Quran that discuss matters of arrogance, matters of pride, matters of jealousy. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ijtanibu kathiran min adh-dhann inna ba'da adh-dhanni itham wa la tajassasu wa la yaghtab ba'dukum ba'da. Ayat of Quran speaking about don't have ill assumptions regarding people, right? The majority of your ill assumptions are sins, right? That don't have suspicions, don't spy on people, right? Do not make ghibat, don't backbite and gossip people. All these ayat of Quran that come, these are talking about matters of the heart. To deny these matters wholesale and say that they don't exist in deen, this is a very dangerous proposition because you're actually negating an entire field of Islam. Now those people, they maybe say, or maybe make this claim, or maybe have an adverse reaction to tasawwuf, will have a good opinion of them and assume that perhaps they have an incorrect assumption of what tasawwuf is, and hence they've come to this conclusion. But if we define tasawwuf to be purifying the heart and adorning it with good qualities, inshallah, we hope this definition everyone will accept is a inseparable, right? Inseparable, essential element of Islamic teaching, and an essential element of the deen and sharia. So, now clarifying the notions of the incorrect Sufis, those people that out of ignorance have introduced incorrect practices within it. Just like, for example, some people in their fiqh, they introduce incorrect practices. Some people have these notions that are incorrect notions, right, regarding what they should do in salat. So they just start doing salat in an incorrect manner. For instance, some people, they do their salat and they never open their mouth. They just stand there and they're completely silent. From beginning to end, they're completely incorrect. Or they stand up in salat and they're half naked, right? There's portions of their body that are required to be covered are uncovered and they're standing in salat, right? Whatever the case may be, a person is standing in salat and they didn't realize they did something that broke their wudu. We won't say that there's no such thing, that these people, that they hate salat. No. These people have an incorrect understanding. They don't know their salat, and hence they've done things that violate their salat without even realizing it. Similarly, some people introduce these concepts into tasawwuf that have nothing to do with it. They think they're doing something that is drawing them closer to Allah, but in reality, their incorrect assumption and notion has actually led them in the wrong direction. Just like what happened with many Christians. Allah says in the Quran regarding the followers of Isa alayhi salam, that He says, وَجَعَلْنَا فِي قُلُوبِ الَّذِينَ اتَّبَعُوهُمْ رَأْفَةً وَرَحْمَةً وَرَهْبَانِيَّةً ابْتَدَعُوهَا مَا كَتَبْنَاهَا عَلَيْهِمْ إِلَّا ابْتِغَاءَ رِضْوَانِ اللَّهِ فَمَا رَعَوْهَا حَقَّ رِعَايَتِهَا. Allah says about the Christians, the followers of Isa alayhi salam. He says Allah placed within their hearts love and kindness. Allah placed within the hearts of the Christians love and kindness. And we see many Christians have this quality. وَرَهْبَانِيَّةً ابْتَدَعُوهَا مَا كَتَبْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ. Right? And the monasticism that they imposed upon themselves, that we never decreed upon them in the first place. The monasticism, the monkhood that the Christians invented, Allah never decreed it upon them. It was a bid'ah that they came out with themselves. And they only had good intentions, like Allah says, ابتغاء رضوان الله. That they did it, why? Seeking the pleasure of Allah. They had good intentions when they did it. They were very sincere. They introduced this concept of monasticism within Christianity. And they had only the intention of pleasing Allah. فَمَا رَعُوهَا حَقَّ رِعَايَتِهَا. But they were not able to uphold it to the extent that it was due. فَمَا رَعُوهَا حَقَّ رِعَايَتِهَا. They weren't able to uphold it. They weren't able to look after it with the right that it was due. So brothers and sisters, we understand this, that many a time people may introduce things into the deen with good intentions, but they were not things that Allah decreed upon us in the first place. And when we do this, it will lead us in the incorrect direction, and we won't be able to fill the due right that needs to be given to it. We won't say wholesale every action that people do is bid'ah. We aren't those people that call everything bid'ah. But when things do become bid'ah, we have to acknowledge that they've become bid'ah. Okay. I apologize if this seems like a long introduction, but this is a lengthier section. This introduction will help us now understand it a lot quicker. So Hakim says, nowadays, many Sufis, and he's not talking about all Sufis, many Sufis are caught up in thinking that the more they punish their lower selves, their nafs, the more Allah will be pleased with them. Even if this sacrifice, quote unquote, this sacrifice of theirs is contrary to the Sharia itself. We've explained in the last two durus that we've had, the last two lessons that we have, that self-inflicted sacrifice, self-inflicted hardship and difficulty is not matlub, is not desirable. Only when a person sacrifices for the sake of a higher objective, of something that Allah has demanded of him, something that Allah has prohibited of him, or some situation in life that Allah has put him in, then and only then will a person be rewarded for his sacrifice or her sacrifice. When a person therefore goes through sacrifice for a needless sake, a pointless sake, there's no reward in it. All the more so when a person sacrifices in a way that violates the Sharia, not only will they not be rewarded for it, for the violation of Sharia, it is very likely they will be sinful for it. Right? So those people that punish themselves in this way, that the Sharia does not even permit in the first place. Right? This is something that is a deception that people are in, many people are in. To this point, some have even declared meat of haram upon themselves out of their fanaticism, while others have vowed to abstain from drinking cold water. Moreover, some have refused to sleep on beds, while others have gone as far as paralyzing their own limbs. These brothers and sisters are completely inappropriate. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He corrected the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the Quran. There was a situation, long story that I won't go into right now. If those that are interested, look at the tafsir of Surah Tahrim in the beginning. But the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one time, a situation came about him where he fell into a disagreement, or he fell into a little dispute with some of his wives. And this happens in domestic life, right? It happens in domestic life. We're not going to say it's something that was catastrophic. It's something that happens in day-to-day life, right? When you're living with someone day and night. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as a result, he prohibited himself from doing something in hopes that it would satisfy us and please his wives. So what happened? Allah revealed verses. Ya ayyuhan nabiyyu lima tuharrimu ma ahallallahu lak tabtaghi mardata azwajika wallahu ghafurur rahim. O Prophet, why have you prohibited upon yourself something that Allah made halal upon you? Seeking to please your wife, right? Seeking to please some of your wives, whereas Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is forgiving and merciful. So Allah is actually telling him, right? قَدْ فَرَضَ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ تَحِلَّةَ أَيْمَانِكُمْ. And then Allah says, and Allah has obligated upon you that you should actually break your vow. That you should do a kafara, that you should, the vow that you made upon yourself, making something haram upon yourself, break that vow and go back and make that thing halal upon you once again. To this extent, Allah revealed this verse. Why? Because the Prophet made something haram upon himself that Allah did not make, that Allah made halal. So Allah said, don't make it haram upon yourself. Allah has made it halal. And Allah has obligated you that don't fulfill this vow, rather do kafara of it. Just like that, brothers and sisters, some people thinking to themselves they're doing something of piety, they've sworn off certain things that Allah made halal for them. Don't do that. Don't make haram upon yourself what Allah has made halal upon you, seeking some act of piety through it. This is exactly what the rahbaniyah that Allah describes in the Quran about the Christians was. They made haram upon themselves getting married. And by extension, haram upon themselves having intimate relations with a woman. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never obligated that in the first place. Similarly, there were 3 companions that once, took vows. One vowed to never sleep at night, so that they would pray. One vowed to fast every single day, and one vowed that they would never get married. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam forced them all to break their vows. And he told them that I am the most fearful of Allah amongst you, and the most pious towards him, right? And I'm someone who sometimes eats and sometimes breaks his fast. And I'm someone who sometimes sleeps a portion of the night and prays a portion of the night. And I'm a person who marries women. So this clarifies, brothers and sisters, seeking to please Allah don't make things haram upon yourself. Clarification here. If a person is staying away from meat for health reasons, right? Your cholesterol is off the charts, right? Or your desires are is out of control, and there's just too many hormones going through you. You need to lower your temptations, or you need to lower your cholesterol or your blood pressure. And as a result, a person adopts, say, a vegetarian or a vegan diet. They're not seeking to do an act of piety through it. They're seeking health benefits, or they're seeking to curb their appetite, or they're seeking to control their desires through it. This is perfectly fine, because you're not doing it thinking you're going to get rewarded through it. You're doing it for some other purpose, some other objective. You're doing it for that reason. That's okay, right? Even if a person, for instance, stays away from meat because, look, a person is having difficulty controlling his desires. He keeps falling into, sins of like pornography, masturbations, fornication. A person keeps falling into that. Staying away from meat, it helps a person guard their sexual appetite. If a person does it for that reason, that's different altogether. You're not doing it because you think it to be an act of piety in and of itself. You're doing it to save yourself from out of control desires. These situations are okay, right? Similarly, if a person has some health issues, forcing them to not drink cold water, you're sick. It's okay if you're sick that you don't drink cold water. Or a person has back pain, so he doesn't sleep on a bed any longer. All these situations, right? There are situations where they may be permitted. They may be permitted based on a reason, as long as a person doesn't assume they will get reward inherently for doing these acts. He continues saying, I once saw during the midsummer a man sitting encircled by some fires that he had lit for himself. These acts are nothing but mere ignorance, right? A person in the middle of summer is already hot. So what does he do? He turns on fires and sits in the middle of fires to get hotter. Right, my Shaykh, rahimahullah, Shaykh Tamim Ahmadi, may Allah, hafidhahullah, may Allah preserve him. He mentioned the story that he once saw when he was in school, that once there was an individual, he would try to impose as much difficulty upon himself as he could. So in the summertime, when it would be over 100 degrees, he would sit on the outside of the exhaust of the AC. The way an AC works is it sucks out the hot air from within a room and blows in, it cools in the air and blows that in, and it blows out the hot air from the other side. So one direction you have hot air, one direction you have cold air. So this person would go and sit in the side that was blowing out hot air, until eventually this person became so overwhelmed, he needed to drop everything. He said, Deen is too hard. He left everything that he was doing of good altogether. He left the madrasa, he left the school. Allah knows best what his end result was. When people make things hard on themselves for no reason, eventually it will overwhelm them. Like the hadith we mentioned previously, that inna deena yusr, wa la yushad ad-deena ahadun illa ghalabahu. That indeed this deen is of ease, and never does a person make things hard upon himself except that it will eventually overwhelm him. So these are not acts of piety, and a person should not think that they'll gain some reward out of it. Rather, these are acts of ignorance. Now, having said that, we maintain balance. Nevertheless, you should not let these deviations cast doubt upon the struggles of all those saintly people who endured great difficulties in order to reform their lower selves. This is because these great people never transgressed the limits of permissibility. They only endured struggling through difficulties as a means of spiritual treatment, not because they thought it was worship or a means of gaining closeness to Allah. Right? We may read in some books, right, that certain prescriptions that are given. Imam Ghazali, rahimahullah ta'ala, mentions in his books, for example, severe prescriptions for what extent people should leave eating food, leave sleeping, leave speaking to people, leave mixing with people at a very high level, right? Or in other books, some of the mashayikh, they write things that are very stern. We aren't saying that what they were writing was deviation. No, wallahu wal-'iyadhu billah. What they mentioned was something that they mentioned as a prescription for those that needed it. What they mentioned because they did so with the understanding that people would not transgress the limits, right? They did so as a means of spiritual treatment, not as an act of worship in and of itself. And there's a difference. The example that I gave earlier, that a person gives up eating meat, not thinking it to be haram, not thinking that he'll get rewarded for not eating meat, or that vegetarian diet has some special reward in it, but he gives up meat because he notices that my desires are out of control. I need to do something to curb my sexual appetite. And by staying away from meat, it helps me be able to have lesser desires. And this helps me be able to guard my sexual appetite. This is okay. And many a time the mashayikh, if they mention what they mentioned it for these reasons, not that a person does it unrestrictedly. A person does it for a couple of days to curb their appetite or to gain whatever strength that they need to gain, and then after that they give it up. These are exercises that are done for a purpose. Once that purpose has been reached, you leave it. Right? We fasted in the days of Ramadan, we go through hunger and thirst so that we can gain taqwa. But if a person is not getting hungry or thirsty through his fast, you don't say that, you know what, I don't need to fast no more. No, keep fasting. You'll get the reward of it nevertheless. Just like that, these things, brothers and sisters, they prescribe them as a means of developing the nafs, not as a means of getting rewarded by them. Very key point here. I hope everyone understands this clarification. If you do not, at the end, please make a note of it, and at the end, ask. We'll discuss it a little bit further. Their similitude is like that of a sick person who abstains from eating certain types of food for a few days, right? Sometimes a person, out of having to guard himself for health reasons, a person stays away from certain things for a few days. If a person is always getting headaches, which is keeping him from being able to do his salat, then for a person to stay away from those foods that leads to headaches, for the intention that this will allow me to be able to do my salat, this is something that's good, right? And the discussion here is long. I hope brothers and sisters have understood from the examples that have already been mentioned. He does not think this, he does not consider this to be worship. Rather, he only does it to be a means by which he can attain a cure for his ailment. Right? He doesn't think this is an act of reward. He does it as an act of ilaj. He does it as an act of remedy. So these Sufis of the past, the pious Sufis, the one that were guided, that might have done some of these practices or written about them or spoken about them, why did they even go into those discussions in the first place? Not to get people to do these things for no reason. They only did it as a prescription to help people remedy some sort of spiritual ailment, not because there was inherent reward in them in and of themselves. This is very key. Moreover, if anyone thinks he will be rewarded for going through these unnecessary difficulties, then he will definitely be in sin. He will definitely be in sin because he has added something to the Sharia. This is the reason behind the repugnance of innovation in religion, the repugnance of bid'ah in the deen. The hadith of bid'ah are many. Those great luminaries only endured going through difficulties, avoiding the things that they did as a form of treatment, in direct contrast to the ignorant people who may do so thinking that they're part of the deen or worship or a means of gaining proximity and closeness to Allah. This is the key point here, brothers and sisters. What makes a matter of bid'ah bid'ah? I know we have sometimes the bid'ah police that are out there making everything bid'ah. So some people gain an aversion from the concept of bid'ah altogether. They assume it's all good. I'm just trying to make Allah happy, right? I have good intentions. Look, there's a balance here. Not every single thing that people do is bid'ah. And similarly, a lot of things is clearly bid'ah, right? What is the difference? What makes something bid'ah? Bid'ah is a bid'ah on the basis of the belief related to it, the understanding and conviction in association with it. When does something become bid'ah? When a person has associated with an action a belief that is not appropriate for that action. I'll give an example. Imam Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah ta'ala, one of our great imams of the Salaf, he considered for people in his era, key word here, in his era, he gave the fatwa for people to fast 6 days in the month of Shawwal after Ramadan to be a bid'ah. Now, this comes in a hadith that anyone who fasts 6 days in the month of Shawwal, after fasting the month of Ramadan, كَانَ كَصِيَامِ الدَّهْرِ. It's like a person who fasted for the entirety of his life. It's like he fasted for the entire year. Why? Because you fasted 30 days of Ramadan, and then you fasted 6 days of Shawwal, that's 36 days, and for every deed, لِكُلِّ حَسَنَةٍ عَشْرَةُ أَمْثَالِهَا. For every good deed, it gets multiplied by 10. So when you do 36 fasts, multiplied by 10, that's 360. That's almost the equivalent of a lunar calendar. So a person who fasts, this comes in a hadith, 6 days of Shawwal, after fasting the month of Ramadan, it's as if he fasted the entire year. Why then did Imam Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah ta'ala, give this fatwa for the people of his era, that it's a bid'ah for them, it's undesirable for them, it's makruh, right? It's makruh for them to fast the 6 days of Shawwal. It's because in his era, a large number of people in his locality, they started doing this thing where they would not fast the day of Eid. On the day of Eid, they would eat, and then for 6 days straight, they would fast again. And they would have like a second Eid and say, this is our real Eid now, because now we can really eat. They made the 6 days fasting of Shawwal almost as if it's a requirement of the deen, and they began treating it such. To such an extent, they started declaring their real Eid to be the day after the 6 days of fasting. And he recognized that their belief regarding this action which is mustahab, this action which is an act of reward, it's not something which is a requirement of the Sharia and has no rank higher than that. They started giving it a rank higher than that. They almost started making it a matter of obligation. And they started treating it as such, to such an extent they invented a second Eid as a result of it. So he said this is now undesirable. Doing it in this way, doing it with this incorrect notion and belief, it goes against the spirit of what the Prophet prescribed. The Prophet mentioned it as an act of reward. Do it in a way where you think it reward. Don't assume that this is now a real Eid. I can now actually enjoy myself. No, you can have enjoyed yourself from the Eid that Allah gave you. Now you're doing something extra, consider it to be extra and just that. That's why after this notion was removed from the people and they began to understand this with the right understanding, what happened? The students of Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, they started again permitting this fast, and people began fasting these 6 days all over again. From this, we see a scenario and an analogy, an example of what is the reality of bid'ah, is when people consider something to have a rank higher than it has. A matter may even have a basis in the Sharia, like the example that I gave. There's a basis for it, there's a hadith for it. But when people began to think it required, they began to think it wajib, now the ruling regarding it will change. Now it becomes a bid'ah, not because of the act itself, but because of the people's attitude in relation to the act. When an optional act, people start treating it like an obligatory act, this is now a bid'ah. When a permissible act, people now consider it to be a essential matter of the deen, this is a act of bid'ah. A permissible act, when people start considering it to be a haram or disliked, this is now an act of bid'ah. A prohibited act, when people now consider it to be permissible, this is now an act of bid'ah. When people consider something to have a ruling in Sharia that in reality it does not, this in a nutshell is what is bid'ah. So those earlier Sufis that did some of these practices for the sake of rectifying their souls, or they might have prescribed it upon their students or the people of their era, because they understood that people would not have this misunderstanding, that this is not an act of Sharia, this is not an act of deen, this is merely a spiritual exercise that will build you, that will build your strength to assist you in then worshiping Allah. They prescribed it, understanding it like that. But in our day and age, when people begin to do them or understand them or view them or apply them in a way, thinking it to be an essential matter of the deen, thinking it to be an act that by itself will make me go close to Allah, thinking it to be an act of worship or an act of reward, that same act that was permissible before now will become bid'ah and impermissible. Rather, it will become sinful. I hope this is now clear to the brothers and sisters. Many a time when we hear certain things to be bid'ah, why does one sheikh say it bid'ah, one sheikh say it's not bid'ah? It could very well be that one sheikh considered it bid'ah for the simple reason that the people in his locality are doing it in a way that is bid'ah. They have an incorrect belief in relation to it. Whereas people in a different locality, they have the correct understanding of it, and hence the mashayikh, the scholars of their locality, do not consider it to be an act of bid'ah. I hope this clarifies this point. I spent a lot of time upon it, but it applies to many ancillary points that are not related to this discussion, and I hope that this can benefit us in other matters of our life as well. Let's finish this section off. Right? And I'll mention an example. A person might ask, why even do these things in the first place? Why do things that haven't been directly legislated in the Sharia? This is another good question, right? This is another good question. Why even do these things in the first place? if they weren't, we say they're permissible. But why even do them if the possibility exists that eventually people's notion can become incorrect? It's because these are simply tools, brothers and sisters. These are tools that are left in the hands of the user. We don't make things prohibited because of the possibility of someone using it incorrectly. You can take a knife and use it to help you prepare a meal. You can chop up vegetables, you can chop up meat, you can use it to cook. You can use a knife in excellent ways. A knife is a very useful, very excellent tool, right? But people can use a knife in incorrect ways. They can use knives to injure other people. They can use knives to commit murder. That does not mean now we need to prohibit all knives. No, knives had proper uses, knives have incorrect uses. When they're used incorrectly, tell people to use them correctly. Forbid people from their incorrect use, but don't make it prohibited. Just like that, all these things are tools. If we were to say that it's not possible for a person to do them, then it would make things very difficult upon Muslims. To use tasbih, to use prayer beads, right? Zikr beads. This is merely a tool. If a person uses this tool to do the dhikr of Allah, there's no harm in it. Sometimes it can aid a person in concentration. Then rather than spending their entire dhikr trying to remember what number they're on, they just use some prayer beads, they use some dhikr beads, and they count on them, and they can make their attention solely focused on Allah. However, if people take those dhikr beads, they take those prayer beads and hang it around their neck and start to they start flossing it, right? They start showing off, that trying to make people think that there's some special big time Sufi. That which belongs in their pocket is put it around their neck. Then yes, in this case where a person is now doing an act of showing off, making it an accessory, right? And treating it incorrectly. Now we can say that, okay, this is an incorrect act, and hence we will say that it is bid'ah. But people that are using it correctly to do the dhikr of Allah, there's no harm in it. Similarly, that person who is staying away from certain foods because, he's becoming unhealthy and his lack of health is holding him back from the worship of Allah, then yes, stay away from certain foods. Understanding this is very key. And the example of this we see even in the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum. There were many things that they did because they understood there was a benefit to be found in it. And as long as people don't have the incorrect notion of it, then they're permissible. A very good example of this is the Mus'haf of the Quran. The collecting of the Quran into book form. This never happened in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet himself never read in his entire life from a Mus'haf. So where did this concept? You find masjids filled with Mus'hafs. You find masjids filled with the Quran in bound form. There's not a house that you'll find of the Muslims that does not have the bound Quran, the Quran in book form in their life. And yet the Prophet never in his life read from a Mus'haf. It never existed within his life. So if it never existed within his life, wouldn't this also be a bid'ah? No, brothers and sisters, why do we not consider this to be a reprehensible innovation, an evil bid'ah? Why do we not consider it that? Why do we not consider it that? We consider it to be an acceptable act. We even consider a person will be rewarded for using it. It's because no one has the notion that it is wajib, it is required. We understand it's a tool, that it's not practical for every single Muslim to be able to memorize the Quran. Let alone, it's very difficult to memorize the Quran without something to read from. And hence, we consider it to be a permissible act to read from the Mus'haf. So the Sahaba, they compiled the Quran into a single book form for the ease of people and for the clear understanding to this time that people understand that this Mus'haf, this compiled Quran, it is not something that it is wajib, that is required to read from. It's merely a tool to aid us in our recitation. Like that, all of these things apply. But if some people started saying that you can only read from the Mus'haf, to read without the Mus'haf is incorrect, this is now where the problem lies. Or when people, they completely leave reading the Quran from memory, they completely leave memorization of the Quran, they only rely upon the written text of the Quran, this is where it becomes problematic. So I hope this clarifies the matter. I know I've got run long. Let me just finish this section and we'll wrap it up for today, inshallah. Because the pure Sharia of Islam has set limits for everything, it is necessary to allow the nafs some comfort in addition to providing it with its necessities. This goes back to the discussion we had on Wednesday, that the nafs, we give it all its rights and some of its ease, some of its comfort, not all. some of its ease and comfort, but give it some. Sometimes the nafs needs some relief. Sometimes the nafs needs some relief. Even the Prophet ﷺ, he would take rest at times. He would sleep, right? There were days he would not fast. He would also rest and recuperate, right? And this is ultimately what then helps a person better appreciate the bounties of Allah, right? Because even appreciating the bounties of Allah is an act of reward. The goal is not to make ourselves deprived of every bounty. No, the goal is to be patient from those bounties we don't have and to be grateful for those bounties that we do have. This is the goal. It has been narrated that Salman al-Farisi radiallahu anhu once visited Abu Darda radiallahu anhu and observed that he would spend the entire night in worship. Upon observing this, Salman prevented him from doing so. Eventually, the matter was brought to the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who said, Salman has spoken the truth. He then mentioned the shari'i limitations in this matter, saying, verily your nafs has a right upon you. The narration is there in the footnotes. If anyone wants to read it as I wrap up, you're welcome to do so. I won't read it for the sake of time, or you can read it when I give time for questions. Sadly, the ignorant Sufis have destroyed tasawwuf and made a mockery of it. Talking about those people that are acting upon tasawwuf in an incorrect manner, right? Doing things that are not part of it and introducing things that have no bearing within it. They've destroyed tasawwuf. In what sense? They've made people misunderstand it, and thereby many people that do it incorrectly, and many people that have abandoned it for the wrong reasons. Both people are being harmed. Those that do it wrongly and those people that have abandoned it in totality. The middle path is to do it, but do it in the correct manner. They say, hey, spend 40 days in the khanqah. What does it mean? The khanqah is the spiritual lodge, the zawiyah, right? It's the place where people would go for spiritual reformation. It's okay to go to the khanqah, it's okay to spend time there, but it's not okay to spend time there in such a way where you're actually neglecting your responsibilities. That's the key thing here. If you do it in a way where you're not neglecting your responsibility, that's fine. If a person says, spend 40 days in the khanqah, divorce your wife, disown your children, bolt your doors closed, take only 40 chickpeas and allocate one for each day in seclusion. Without this, you cannot be a real Sufi. No, brothers and sisters, none of these things are needed. Rather, each of these things do the opposite. Except maybe the khanqah one, you can go to the khanqah, you can spend 40 days there, as long as you're not disregarding the injunctions of Sharia upon you. You fulfill the rights of your wife and children, you fulfill the rights of your parents, you fulfill the rights of everyone that has a right upon you. Do it in that manner. And if you don't do it, if you're not able to do it, there's no harm in doing so either. There's no harm in a person not spending 40 days in the khanqah, right? There's no harm in a person not spending 40 days in the zawiyah. There's no harm in a person who's not able to go do i'tikaf because he has responsibilities upon his shoulders, right? And i'tikaf is an example. The 10 days seclusion in the masjid in the month of Ramadan is an example of what it means to seclude oneself for a period of time, right? But these are only appropriate when they're done in a way where all rights are fulfilled. Like Allah says in the Quran, right? Give every individual his due right, right? Continuing, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had mentioned. So, finishing this off, I respond by saying, by Allah, you can be a real Sufi, even if you wear expensive clothing, recline on the pillows and armrests, live in wealth and eat delicious meals, but not by sitting in your house, not by sitting on your hands doing nothing, right? But you have to go to a qualified sheikh, a sheikh kamil, in order to get it. He said you can be a real Sufi, but go to a real sheikh of tasawwuf, learn how it needs to be done, learn how to purify the heart, and after that, whatever luxury you're in, inshallah, now that you have the correct understanding of the balance between these two things, you can then live a life of balance, and you can live a life by which you correctly enjoy the bounties of Allah, but also endure difficulty and hardships for His sake in the correct places. How do you do this? Like Allah says in the Quran, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of remembrance, ask the people of dhikr if you do not know, right? If you don't know how to appropriately do this, go to those people that do and learn from them. And brothers and sisters, that's why the Prophet ﷺ mentioned in a hadith, مَنْ سَلَكَ طَرِيقًا يَلْتَمِسُ بِهِ عِلْمًا سَهَّلَ اللَّهُ لَهُ طَرِيقًا إِلَى الْجَنَّةِ. I believe it's a hadith of Abu Dawood. He mentioned to this effect, that whomever treads a path seeking thereby some knowledge, Allah will make easy for him the path to Jannah. Why? Is because when a person has a correct understanding of the deen, a correct understanding of how to implement the teachings of the deen, then what happens as a result of this? A person will easily be able to tread the path of deen and easily be able to take himself towards Jannah. So where is the balance? The balance is learned at the feet of those that have mastered balance. The balance is learned by going to the mashayikh and learning from them. Brothers and sisters, YouTube and Zoom is very useful and a very easy way to learn many matters of our deen. But there's no real substitute for a direct connection with the mashayikh. Right? Ask questions. Right? We live, even in the situation we're in this COVID crisis, you can still ask questions to the mashayikh, call them up, right? Message them. When, inshallah, once we're out of this, and may Allah take us out of this, with expediency and with ease, right? With afiyah. May Allah take us out of this current pandemic that we're in. But when we're out of this, take advantage to go and sit with the qualified mashayikh. Find them, search for them. Some people have this complaint that there are no real sheikhs left. They are there, but it takes a little bit of effort to find them. Just like if you had a serious ailment and your regular general practitioner, your regular internal medicine doctor could not solve that for you, don't stop there. Go to a specialist. Go to the specialist that will be able to explain the matters to you. If the local imam, after his best efforts, was not able to answer your question, was not able to guide you, was not able to assist you in the way that you need, thank him for his efforts, but then go to a specialist. Go to the mashayikh, the people that are the masters of the field. And if you're trying to seek remedying the diseases of the heart, go to the masters, those that have mastered the spiritual sciences. Go to those people that have dedicated themselves to the spiritual sciences, that have dedicated themselves to the sciences of the diseases of the heart. Just like you go to the mufti for the matters of fiqh, go to the Sufi sheikh, the real qualified Sufi sheikh, not the imposter charlatan, right? Not the one that's giving wrong advice. Go to the qualified one and learn the correct way of doing this. Ask advice from them, right? Learn from them like a student learns from a teacher. That's all you have to do. And if you don't know where to start, go to a alim that you trust and ask them. They'll inshallah be able to direct you in the right direction. And don't stop. If you have a question, keep asking until you find the answer. I apologize for running extremely long today and for many of the side discussions that came up today. But there are so many misunderstandings, so much confusion that is spread from these two key points, right? The correct understanding of what is tasawwuf and who are Sufis, between the balance and the extremism, and the second point of what is and what is not bid'ah. Brothers and sisters, there's a reality to both, and there's an extremism in both. Stay away from the extremism and stay upon the middle path. I hope this clarifies these important points. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the ability to act upon this. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us for any wrong that might have been said incorrectly, and may Allah accept from us whatever might have been said correctly. It was only by His benevolence. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanakallah wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. I'll give a few minutes for questions and for people to read the hadith if you did not get a chance to read the hadith earlier. I apologize once again for running long. We'll continue from where we left off on Monday. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. If anyone has any questions, you're welcome to ask. And if there's no questions, I'll give a minute or so for people to be able to read the hadith if you did not get a chance to read it earlier. For those listening on YouTube, I apologize. I'm not sure exactly how to see any questions there. I encourage you, if you need to ask questions, please log into the Zoom meeting, and inshallah, you'll be able to ask questions there. Okay, so with that, inshallah, we'll conclude for today. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanakallahu wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum.